Good afternoon, everyone. You hear me okay? Okay. I don't have a moderator here yet, but I'm just going to get started since I don't have very much time. My name is Jessica Byerman. I'm with Geocom. I'm a senior GIS project manager, and I've worked at Geocom for going on 18 years now. And for the past 6 years, I've been the project manager for the GIS side of the Next Gen 911 project for the state of North Carolina. So I might know some of you by name, emails and things like that. I don't know that many faces. How many of you take care of submitting data to GIS Data Hub for Next Gen 911? All right, quite a few. All right, thank you. Feel free to jump in and ask questions throughout, but there'll be time for questions at the end too. So to give you an update, we'll talk about TDMS today. That's the Transitional Data Management System. And that is, part of that is replacing the legacy MSEG with the GIS-derived MSEG. It's my understanding many of you have waited for this. So we'll go through those requirements and the plans for that. And then I want to take a look at the statewide boundary topology as well, because there's still some work to do there, and give some tips and tricks on that. So the GIS-derived MSEG, or also known as the GeoMSEG, you'll hear it referred to as, is on its way in. We have a few counties that have already, one county that's transitioned and a few more that are in the process, and we're hoping to get everyone on board over the next few months. So the conversion process is, it was decided that the address points will be used rather than the road center line. And the reason for this is because the address points are your exact addresses available. It's not just a range where maybe a telephone company could enter in the wrong address if a resident gives them the wrong house number, for example. If it's address points, those are the exact addresses. So almost everyone in the state is submitting a full address point layer. There are a few that aren't, and so there's some workarounds to that. But our goal is to be above 98% synchronization between your landline records, your ALI database records, and those address points. As we work through the schedule, we kind of started with a few that were above the 98%, and we'll probably continue with that, but I want to make sure everyone else is aware of because it's some work might need to be done on your end if you're not even close to that 98%. So we'll provide synchronization results to each PSAP and GIS submitter to work on corrections. And please note that all records will be assigned a single routing ESN. So you haven't had to maintain an ESN to match between MSEG and GIS data, and you won't have to moving forward either. It'll be configured as something called an input value in GIS Data Hub. So we'll just enter it in. That means every record that you submit, once it gets to the statewide data set, it'll have that single ESN used for routing. So you don't need to maintain it locally. If you do have other purposes for your ESN, like for CAD or so, you of course can keep it, but you don't need to have that single routing ESN. So the next step after the synchronization results are sent to you with instructions is that we'll get into this thing called a simulation. This is done at AT&T, where they compare the statewide GIS data, so your data in that statewide data set, to your ALI database. This is done PSAP by PSAP. We'll have to put any GIS Data Hub submissions, put those on hold for that time being, because right after the simulation, if everything looks good, those results are good, we'll move on to the actual conversion process to that GeoMSEG. So that simulation uses slightly different logic, so the results may differ. I believe the difference is that it actually parses out the individual fields, so the pre-directional street name, street type, and post-directional, instead of comparing just the concatenated versions of both of them. So there may be slight differences, but if you are at 98% in your GIS Data Hub synchronization check between ALI and address points, you're in really good shape. If those simulation results, those show less than 98%, there need to be some corrections before we can move on with a conversion. And during that correction time, of course, we'll give you access again to GIS Data Hub. You'll be able to submit data if those changes are needed on the GIS data. It could be that ALI database records are wrong. Maybe there's an actual house number again that was entered incorrectly and it's not really a valid address. Then you have to work with your telcos to get those corrected, or it may be that your address points are missing a few addresses that have landline phones. So those things need to be corrected so that you're above the 98%. I mean, the end goal is 100%. You really want every record to match every valid landline record. And so the conversion process takes approximately 2 weeks. So after that simulation, if we move forward, there'll be 2 weeks where we wouldn't accept any data because AT&T can't accept any of that data. They want the conversion to be done, the data to be pushed into the AT&T PSP system, so it's there, and then they'll accept new updates. And as soon as that's done, you won't have to go into PSP to do MSEG updates anymore. All your MSEG or GeoMSEG updates would be updated through that site structure address point submission process to GIS Data Hub. These are the fields that are used, so these are the ones that need to be maintained. I have the ESN on here because the ESN is being used, but it's only that routing ESN, and we'll notify you of what that is, and it'll be, like I said, entered as an input value, so you don't need to maintain it locally. But this is what's going to replace your MSEG. Some things to prepare for. We just recently added the option or the QC check that checks between alley database and address points. Previously, it was just alley database to road center lines. So if you've been submitting an alley database, you would have gotten new results just over the last few months that show you where you're about at. But if you haven't submitted an alley database, or it's been a while since you downloaded a new one from PSP, please do so and include that with your submission. You can either import it as a table into the geodatabase, or right now, GIS Data Hub also accepts it as an Excel file in your zipped folder with your file geodatabase. And then you'll get to see approximately where you're at and can get working on this. I know everyone at some point in this project, so since 2019, was at over 98% between alley database and road centerline. So I think all of you are probably really good on that level at least, and there might just be some work on the address points. So correct as many of those errors as you possibly can so that when we get to you, you're ready to do that conversion. So some things to consider. Like I said, some don't yet maintain a countywide complete address point layer. If you look at the statewide data set that's available in the data packages section in GIS Data Hub, you can see, there's just a couple places that aren't complete. Either they're not maintaining them or they're just not submitting them because only a single point was a minimum requirement. So you have some options if you don't have all the points though. So the process works, so this GeoMSEG, is used to validate telephone records and ensure they get into the alley database. It's that single ESN, and the reason that ESN is needed in the MSEG community and so forth is for a backup for routing. So if a call comes in and it's not able to route using I3, so using your GIS data and your PSAP boundaries, it falls back on this MSEG and a selective router. And that ESN tells it, okay, this is the PSAP the call needs to be sent to. So what you could do to get to the 98 or above percentage to start out with is geocode any points that you don't have addresses for. Use the roads to geocode them and to create placeholder points while working on creating that complete address point data set to move those geocoded points to the true house, or figure out if one of the alley database records is wrong and you need to update the actual telco alley database record. So because it's not for this purpose, this GeoMSEG, it's just creating a tabular database, just like the MSEG, from your address point layer. So technically, those points could be anywhere in your county. It doesn't matter as long as they fall into the correct ESN to be routed into the correct PSAP too. Does anyone have any questions on this part? Because I'm moving completely over to the topology afterwards. Good. And feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions. Okay. Now, moving to the statewide boundary topology, there's definitely still some work that needs to be done. As you can see, we have a couple of holes. There's 2 counties that haven't submitted their boundaries, or if they have, since we moved to GIS Data Hub 2 a year and a half ago, if they have submitted them, they just haven't had critical error-free submissions, so their data never made it to the statewide. A couple other holes that we have in here are the military installations, so those we can fill in until they submit their own data. Yeah, see some areas, great, especially over on the eastern side, there everything's aligned. Some other areas, not so much. In some cases, it's only a couple feet difference. In some cases, it's true boundary differences where the boundary lines are completely different between the two counties, not even close. So we really want you to work on this to have this clean and perfect, because it'll ensure that any true boundary changes that happen, not just your PSAP, but also your fire, law, and EMS layers, that those can get provisioned to AT&T in a timely manner. There's no manual intervention. I have to clean any of this up to get it to actually pass. Keep in mind too, if you have really complicated boundaries, it maybe you're following like a surveyed county boundary, it's not necessary for next gen 911 to do that, because your boundaries are used for, for call routing. So if it's a landline call, it's based on the road or address point location. If it's a wireless call, it's based on the XY. So it's not that precise either, if it's a couple feet off this way or that, where that call will get routed. So you can simplify things if that's necessary, if it's too complicated to work with your neighbor on something that has thousands of vertices when you're going along a river or mountain. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention is just, again, work in your native projection. So the projection that you, probably in 1983, I think, is what most are using. And don't try to align in WGS 84, because that will, during that transformation process, errors can be introduced. So it's best to do it in your native projection, and then let GIS Data Hub take care of that conversion and transformation to WGS 84, which is done before it generates the statewide data set. And also a reminder, I've gone over this during different web sessions that we've had, that, how are the PSAP, fire, law, and EMS boundaries that you're maintaining and submitting, how are those actually used? So the PSAP boundary is what is used to determine which PSAP to route the call. So whether it's a landline or a wireless call, wherever that call plots, then the URI value in that PSAP boundary that you maintain, that's used to then send the call through the ESINet to get to the correct PSAP. And then with that call, the fire, law, and EMS display names that are in your data, those are sent with that call. So the ESN itself is no longer sent at all with the call. That's if your PSAP uses the ESN information, it's whatever is in their map data and gets pulled up or in some other table. It's not coming through that ESINet. But like I said, it can be maintained locally if needed for any other purposes, but no longer necessary to maintain it for any kind of synchronization between ALI database and GIS data. And for your call handling solutions, either Viper or Vesta, they have a display limit that you need to consider. And maybe you've already talked to your PSAPs or they've talked to you. So that display name, you probably want it to be fairly short, because there's only so many characters that can be shown in the call handling solution. So just consider that too. If you may ever make updates to those display names, you might not want them too descriptive, because they'll get too long to display. And nifty tool found in ArcGIS Pro that works similar to the ArcMap topology tools. So if you work with your neighbors to adjust boundaries, talk to each other, decide who's going to be adjusting to the others, or if there's any compromise that needs to happen. But if you go to map topology, so you see where the number 1 is up on the left, choose that, then edit vertices, and then choose in your modify features window the edges, and that allows you to then click on a boundary line, and it will show the vertices that all match for all those boundaries that are on top of each other. So that means your PSAP, provisioning, fire, law, and EMS, they all currently should have a vertex at the same location on the outside boundaries. You can grab them and move them all at the same time instead of having to do that one by one. I thought that was really neat. I did try to use the line edge tool with this after snapping at least some of the vertices, and it didn't seem to like that, unfortunately. To just, say anything that has a gap here between these areas, just move them all at once, that would be great, but didn't have any luck with that. Maybe you'd have better luck with it. Either way, I think using this tool and all the vertices moving, them at the same time from the same location will save a lot of time. Just wanted to show, this is just, this is a bigger gap. I think this might have been 50 or 60 feet across. Most of the time, it's just 1 or 2 feet. And this isn't a river, so I don't know how much, how exact does it have to get. Maybe just find one county aligned to the other county. And I just pulled out one county as an example, so I'm sorry, I'm not trying to point out any specific ones. I just pulled them from GIS Data Hub and used them in their native projection as an example. Like here, because it's in a river, you have all these vertices, but the other county does not. You could use on the bottom right, see that arrow with the minus, or just hit the D key on when you're selecting or before you start selecting the vertices. You can delete them all at once if you don't want that many. And again, because you're using that edges edit vertices, it's doing all the vertices at the same time for all the layers instead of just one by one. All right, that's what I had for today. Thank you so much for coming and listening. And does anyone have any questions?
Where can I find this statewide provisioning boundary layer?
So the statewide layer would be in the data packages section in GIS Data Hub. Okay, but you will want to talk to your neighbors and get their data and their local projection. I wouldn't, don't pull that one to do alignment. Just you can use that for reference more. So, you're welcome. Anyone else? Questions? Okay. Well, I don't see anything. At least I am.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and appreciate it.